Mrs. Deans, it is a rather good day for you. A lovely day. It is just past midnight in Chelsea, London.
The house on Cadogan Lane is quiet, almost unnaturally so. In the bathroom, the light remains on.
Behind a locked door, one of the most recognizable voices of the 20th century has gone silent. Judy Garland is 47 years old. To the world, she's still Dorothy, forever walking toward a brighter place somewhere over the rainbow. In these final hours, there is no stage, no spotlight. Only exhaustion, routine, and a body that has been pushed too far for too long. What actually happened in that bathroom? Was this a sudden tragic accident or the inevitable end of a life conditioned to survive on pills, pressure, and performance? Why did help not arrive in time, and who, if anyone, was supposed to notice the warning signs in those last hours? This is not just the story of a famous death. It is the story of how a system builds a star, keeps her shining at all costs, then looks away when the light finally flickers. Tonight, we slow time down, hour by hour, decision by decision, to understand what really happened in Judy Garland's final moments, and why her last night still haunts Hollywood more than half a century later. The news breaks in the early hours of June 22, 1969. At first, it spreads in fragments, radio bulletins, hurried phone calls, headlines that seem unreal even as they are read aloud. Judy Garland is dead. But in hours, shock turns into disbelief. For decades, the world has watched her stumble, disappear, reappear, and sing again. She had collapsed before. She had been written off before. Somehow, she always came back. This time, she does not in London. Police quietly secure the house on Cadogan Lane. In New York and Los Angeles, newsrooms scramble. By mid-morning, the story is everywhere. A legend of Hollywood's golden age has died in a foreign city, alone in a bathroom, at an age when many careers are just beginning to slow down, not end. The contrast is jarring. Judy Garland represents joy, resilience, nostalgia. Her voice has soundtracked childhoods, heartbreaks, and hopes across generations. Yet the details emerging are small, clinical, almost mundane: sleeping pills, a locked door, a husband climbing through a window, fans gather instinctively outside theaters, record stores, and Frank E. Campbell Funeral Home in Manhattan, where crowds will soon swell into the tens of thousands. People cry openly for someone they never met, as if a piece of their own past has been taken with her. Her daughter, Liza Minnelli, is 23, already a star in her own right. In this moment, she is simply a child absorbing a loss that feels both private and impossibly public. Years later, she will remember strangers breaking down in front of her, elevator operators unable to contain their grief. Judy Garland's death does not feel like an ordinary celebrity passing. It feels like a cultural wound. Almost immediately, questions begin to surface. The coroner's words, careful, precise, final, describe an accidental overdose. There is no prolonged inquest, no criminal investigation, no open verdict. Officially, the case is closed almost as soon as it is opened. But for many, that explanation feels incomplete. Judy Garland's life had been defined by long battles with depression, addiction, and exhaustion. Could her death really be reduced to a simple accident, or was this the endpoint of something much larger, something that began decades earlier? To understand why Judy Garland's final hours still resonate so deeply, we have to move backward, not just to the weeks before her death, but to the beginning of a life shaped by performance, discipline, and pills. Born Frances Ethel Gumm in 1922, she grows up in a family where performing is not a dream but an expectation. By the time she can read, she can sing. By the time she understands applause, she depends on it. At 15, she is signed by MGM and absorbed into the studio system at its most powerful and most ruthless. On screen, she is presented as wholesome, luminous, endlessly resilient. Off-screen, she is controlled, monitored, and chemically managed. To keep her thin, she is given amphetamines. To help her sleep after punishing filming schedules, she is given barbiturates. This regimen is not secret. It is standard practice. Judy Garland grows up believing this is normal, that her body and mind must be regulated to serve the camera. The irony is cruel. The girl who becomes famous for playing Hope is never allowed to rest. The triumph of the Wizard of Oz cements her place in history, but it also locks her into an image she can never escape. Dorothy is innocent, brave, unbreakable. Judy Garland is none of those things anymore. As she matures, the pressure intensifies. After years of missed shoots and health crises, she is fired from MGM. Publicly, she is framed as difficult. Privately, she is unraveling. Marriages come and go, 5 in total. Each begins with hope and ends under the weight of addiction, insecurity, relentless expectation. Despite her fame, financial security never lasts. Performances become lifelines rather than choices. On stage, Judy Garland is electric. Concerts allow her to connect directly with audiences, to feel understood for a few hours. But they are also punishing. She gives everything night after night, often exhausted, often medicated, often barely holding herself together. By the 1960s, her reputation becomes paradoxical. She is celebrated as a legend and treated as a liability. Every appearance feels like both a comeback and a farewell. What becomes clear in retrospect is that Judy Garland does not fall suddenly. She erodes. The habits formed in adolescence harden into dependence. The applause that once sustained her becomes something she cannot live without and cannot survive for long. By the time she reaches London in 1969, she is no longer chasing fame. She is chasing survival. London is meant to be a reset, a distance from Hollywood, from old contracts and old ghosts. Here, she marries Mickey Deans in a quiet ceremony that signals, at least publicly, a fresh start. She tells reporters she is happy, really happy, for the first time in her life. In hindsight, the declaration sounds fragile, as if happiness must be spoken aloud to exist. Behind the scenes, her health continues to falter. Insomnia returns. The medications never stop. Same patterns remain firmly in place. Her final days are not filled with ominous speeches or dramatic goodbyes. They are defined by normality conversations about schedules, small domestic moments, attempts to rest. Judy does what she has always done when overwhelmed. She retreats inward and relies on routines she knows too well. The warning signs are subtle, not a sudden spiral, but a continuation of long-established habits, sleeping pills taken as needed. Exhaustion normalized. June 21, 1969 passes quietly. Judy remains at home on Cadogan Lane. There are no public appearances, no urgent crises. As evening settles in, the house grows still. She and Mickey Deans watch television together, an unremarkable film playing in the background. For Judy, this kind of quiet companionship is rare. They prepare for bed. She curls her feet against him for warmth. There are no arguments reported, no confessions, no dramatic declarations. At some point during the night, Judy leaves the bedroom and goes into the bathroom. The door closes and locks behind her. Inside, the light stays on. She has access to sleeping pills, the same kind she has taken 4 years to battle chronic insomnia. At some point, she loses consciousness. Deans realizes something is wrong. The door is locked. He climbs through a window to reach her. By the time he does, it is too late. Emergency services are called, but the moment that mattered most has already passed. Judy Garland is pronounced dead at 47, alone in a bathroom thousands of miles from the studios that shaped her. The coroner emphasizes there is no suicide. Number note, no clear intent. The cause is described as an accidental overdose. The tragic outcome of a person long accustomed to medication, whose margin for error had disappeared. In these final hours, there is no villain, no single catastrophic decision, only habit, exhaustion, and a body that has endured too much for too long. In the days that follow, debate grows. Not over how Judy Garland died, but over why the ending feels both inevitable and deeply troubling. The phrase accidental overdose feels clinical, a technical explanation that avoids a larger truth. Doctors quietly acknowledge what many already know. Judy Garland had lived with barbiturate dependence since adolescence. Tolerance blurred danger. Routine masked risk. The line between medication and overdose became terrifyingly thin. Liza Minnelli resists narratives of deliberate self-destruction. She speaks instead of exhaustion of a woman who simply ran out of strength. Not suicidal, not reckless in a dramatic sense, just profoundly tired. Tired of fighting her body, tired of pressure, tired of surviving. The media, however, gravitates toward familiar tropes: the tragic star, the cautionary tale flattening systemic failure into personal weakness. There are no lasting conspiracy theories, no evidence of foul play. The horror of Judy Garland's death lies not in mystery, but in clarity. This was not a sudden fall. It was the final chapter of a story written slowly over decades by a system that rewarded endurance and ignored damage and death. The world remembers her in fragments. A trembling voice singing over the rainbow. A brave smile that barely hides the cost. Her funeral draws thousands. Strangers mourn openly. It feels like the loss of childhood itself, of the belief that talent and perseverance guarantee a happy ending. Judy Garland leaves behind an extraordinary legacy: films, performances, a voice that still comforts people she never met. She showed generations of performers that vulnerability could be powerful, but her life is also a warning. Judy Garland did not fail herself. She was failed by an industry that treated children as assets, medicated exhaustion instead of preventing it, and applauded survival without questioning the cost. Her death was accidental in a medical sense, but morally it asks something deeper. How many accidents must occur before responsibility becomes collective? In her final moments, Judy Garland was not Dorothy, not a legend, not a symbol. She was a tired woman seeking sleep in a body that had forgotten how to rest. There was no grand farewell, only silence. For someone whose life was defined by performance, Judy Garland's final act was not on a stage, but alone in a locked room after a lifetime of giving everything she had. Over the rainbow, audiences once imagined a place where troubles melted away, and Judy Garland helped the world believe in that dream. The tragedy is not that she died young, but that she spent so long being strong for everyone else that there was nothing left when she finally needed rest. The silence that followed is what still speaks. In the years after her death, Hollywood would claim to change. Studios would issue statements. Executives would speak of lessons learned. Judy Garland's name would be invoked as a tragedy no one wanted to repeat, but the truth is harsher. The machine that consumed her never truly stopped. It simply learned how to hide its damage better. Judy Garland's story was never an anomaly. It was a blueprint. A child molded for profit, chemically regulated for efficiency, praised for resilience while being denied protection. When her body began to fail, she was labeled unreliable. When her mind collapsed under pressure, she was called difficult. The system that created her success treated her suffering as a personal flaw rather than an occupational hazard. Hollywood did not kill Judy Garland in a single night. It wore her down slowly, year after year, contract after contract, pill after pill. It taught her that rest was weakness, that silence was dangerous, that survival meant compliance. By the time she reached that bathroom on Cadogan Lane, she was doing exactly what she had been trained to do since adolescence: manage the damage quietly and keep going. What makes her death so unsettling is not mystery, but accountability. There is no villain to arrest, no crime scene to reopen. Responsibility is diffuse, spread across studios, doctors, managers, audiences, and an industry culture that rewarded output and ignored consequence. Judy Garland was celebrated for enduring what no human should have been asked to endure. Even now, Hollywood prefers the myth to the indictment: the rainbow, the smile, the voice. It is more comfortable to mourn her than to fully confront what she represents, because to do so would mean admitting that her suffering was not incidental, it was structural. Judy Garland did not fail Hollywood. Hollywood failed Judy Garland. And until the industry values human limits as much as it values performance, her final night will remain less a tragedy of the past than a warning that continues to echo. What the world remembers is her magic. What it must reckon with is the cost. There would be no trial because the crime was legal. No verdict because the damage was institutional. Judy Garland's death was ruled accidental, but the conditions that led to it were deliberate. This was not a failure of one night in London. It was the predictable outcome of a culture that extracted brilliance and discarded the human being beneath it. Hollywood prefers to remember the girl in the blue dress because it absolves the machine. Nostalgia is easier than accountability. But Judy Garland's final night stands as evidence, not of personal weakness, but of systemic harm. And until that truth is fully acknowledged, every tribute rings hollow. What the world calls a tragedy looks far more like a quiet conviction, and if Judy Garland's story feels uncomfortable to sit with, that discomfort is the point, because once her life is examined without sentiment, it becomes impossible to pretend. She was an exception. She was an early case, not the last one. The template that shaped her would go on to touch countless performers, many of them children, many of them taught the same lesson. Your value exists only while you are useful. Hollywood has always been skilled at laundering harm through glamour. Contracts replace chains, prescriptions replace whips, smiles replace consent. The abuse is made palatable because it produces beauty, and beauty distracts from the wreckage left behind. Judy Garland's suffering was tolerated because it paid well and looked good on screen. What happened to her was not caused by a lack of love or talent or willpower. It was caused by a system that demanded infinite output from a finite body. When that body finally failed, the industry shrugged and called it tragic, as if tragedy were an act of nature rather than the result of repeated conscious choices. There is a reason her story still unsettles Hollywood, threatens the comforting lie that success excuses damage. It exposes how easily applause can become complicity. Judy Garland sang about a place where troubles melt away, but she lived in a world that monetized trouble and called it entertainment. Her final silence does not ask for pity, it asks for reckoning. Because until the industry is willing to confront how many Judy Garlands it created, celebrated, and discarded, the rainbow remains a perpend, the cost of reaching it remains brutally real, and then there is the audience. Not as villains, not as monsters, but as witnesses who learned to look away. We watched Judy Garland return again and again, thinner, shakier, more exposed each time, and we called it bravery. We rewarded the visible strain with louder applause. We framed endurance as triumph and never asked what it took to endure. Every comeback was treated as redemption. Every missed show as scandal. The cycle trained her as effectively as any contract. Fall, recover, perform, break, apologize, sing. The message was clear and consistent. Pain was acceptable as long as it could be transformed into entertainment. Judy Garland did not just perform for Hollywood, she performed for us. There is a particular cruelty in how suffering becomes inspirational once it is safely contained on a stage. Judy's vulnerability made audiences feel closer to her, more connected, more moved. But that closeness was one-sided. When the curtain fell, the applause did not follow her home. The love stopped at the edge of the spotlight. By the time she reached London, the audience already knew the script. This might be the last time. She might not make it. That knowledge did not empty the seats. It filled them. It did not demand rest. We demanded miracles. So when Judy Garland closed the bathroom door on Cadogan Lane, she did so after a lifetime of being told by studios, by doctors, by critics, and by crowds that stopping was failure, that survival was her responsibility alone. The system did not need to be in the room with her that night. Its voice had already been internalized. This is where the story refuses comfort, because if Hollywood is guilty of exploitation, then the audience is guilty of appetite. We consumed the performance and ignored the cost. We loved the sound of her voice breaking because it felt honest, without asking how much breaking it required. Judy Garland's final silence is not an ending designed to teach a lesson neatly. It is an unresolved charge, a question left hanging. In the dark, what do we do when brilliance is fueled by harm? And how many times will we applaud before we admit that admiration without protection is not love at all?